Okay, this video is meant to help you along the process of writing an offer using the 1 to 4 family residential contract. I'm just going to briefly run through the form and give you some insight onto what needs to go in each of the blanks in order to help you create and submit an offer. Alright, first up, number 1 are the parties to the contract, seller and buyer. This can be found on the tax record for the seller, and of course you're probably familiar with the name of your buyer since you've been working with them. Up next is the legal description of the property, also can be found on the tax record as well as the MLS sheet. Lot, block, division, city, county, and of course the address. Exclusions is the next blank. This is anything that the seller wants to retain or keep whenever they move. Number 3, sales price. Cash portion comes first. This is the amount that the buyers will have in cash on closing day. And then of course the sum of financing. So anything that's left to make up this total number, which is the sales price. So A plus B is going to equal C. And then of course you're going to want to check that third-party financing addendum box if any kind of financing is involved. Any kind of loan, conventional, FHA, or VA. License holder disclosure, I've put this in just for example purposes. If you have any kind of interest in the property that you're writing the offer for, you'll want to disclose that here. Earnest money, typically 1% of the sales price, so in this case it's $3,000, 1% of that $300,000 sales price. And where is it going to be deposited? Make sure it is a company that you're referencing here and not an escrow agent. Then you'll want to include the address of that title company as well. Title policy and survey. Seller shall furnish to buyer at seller's expense, so that first box wants to be checked, typical for this market. And then of course the title policy is going to be issued by the same place that you'll be depositing that earnest money, so in this case Stewart Title. My address is at the top of each page as I work my way down the offer. Boundary lines will not be amended or deleted from the title policy, so that first box is checked. Moving down to the survey, you have several options here. Are we going to use an existing survey, or are we going to have a new one at the buyer's expense or a new one at the seller's expense? So you'll check whichever one is applicable. Pretty often the existing survey is used as long as there's been no modifications to the property. So anytime you use an existing survey, a T47 affidavit also has to accompany that existing survey. So you need to make sure that that is included. And you'll also want to check mark down here. If you do check box 1, you'll want to check mark the buyer's expense down here, meaning that a new survey will be obtained by the buyer at the buyer's expense if for whatever reason the existing survey is not acceptable. Residential activity goes in that first blank under objections in 5 days after the buyer receives the commitment. Homeowners Association, at the very bottom of that page you want to check either is or is not, if it is or is not in a homeowners association. Continuing down, there's not too much on page 3 that we need to go over. A lot of it is actually not really relevant to our area. Number 7, property condition. This is in regards to the seller's disclosure if they have or have not received the notice. Check box 2 if they have not received the notice, and then of course you want to put however many days the seller has to deliver that notice to the buyers. If the buyer accepts the property as is, if there's something that they want fixed before inspections, if there's something that they know they want fixed as of right now upon viewing the property, then they'll want to put that in there. Typically they accept the property as is until inspections happen, and then they may negotiate repairs. Residential service contract, also known as a home warranty. You'll put the amount of the plan that you plan to use for this property, and you'll be familiar with what that amount is depending on what the property is and what company you choose to provide that home warranty. Closing date, pretty self-explanatory when you plan to close on the property. You'll want to talk with the lender on this to get a better idea of when specifically the buyers will be able to close. Usually it takes anywhere between 30 and 45 days. Number 10, possession. Typically the buyers take possession of the property upon closing and funding, meaning whenever they close and whenever the money is funded. Sometimes there is a temporary lease involved, but most of the time it's going to be upon closing and funding. Special provisions, if anything is put into this box, it needs to be written by the buyer, him or herself. You don't want to include anything on your behalf here just because you don't want to make yourself a party to the contract by putting something in that special provisions. Number 12 is settlements or other expenses. This is where closing costs would go. So if a buyer is asking for a seller to pay a certain amount of closing costs, it will go right there in that blank. Continuing down the page, we come to number 21, buyer and seller addresses. Here you'll want to complete as much information as possible. You may not have all the information. Just put in what you do know for sure. You may not know the seller's email, for example. You can just put maybe their address or phone number if that's all that you have. Agreement of parties. Any additional addenda is going to be checkmarked here. So I referenced that third-party financing addenda earlier. You want to checkmark that just to say that it is going to be included in the contract. That HOA I talked about earlier, if the property is in a homeowners association, you'll check mark this box for the addendum for property subject to mandatory membership in a property owners association. Right here, if there's any other kind of addenda, TREC issued addenda, that you need to include with this contract, you'll check mark this box and include that here. For example, a non-realty items addendum. If a seller wants to pass a piece of furniture with the property, that piece of furniture will need to go on a non-realty items addenda, and that will need to be disclosed here. Termination option is number 23. Whatever the option fee is going to be and how long the option period will be. Typically it's about $25 a day, so in this case for 10 days a $250 option fee will be paid from the buyer to the seller. And then you don't want to forget this check mark down here. The option fee will or will not be credited to the sales price at closing. So what this means essentially is, will the sellers get to keep the option fee forever, or at closing will it actually be credited to the sales price? So even though the buyers are paying it now, they'll actually see it again whenever it's credited to the sales price at closing. If there's any buyer or seller attorney information, that will be included there. And then one of the last things we need to include is the broker information. So all of your information as well as the other brokerage's information. You can use this license number for Keller Williams Realty and also this license number for K Sutton. That 597 number and that 0165 number. Those are both TREC numbers for Keller Williams and for K Sutton. This last page is just the receipt page. So for the option fee receipt, that is going to be receipted by the listing agent. The option fee is made out directly to the sellers. So the listing agent is the only person who can get that option fee to the sellers, therefore they need to receipt it. And the earnest money and contract receipt, that is receipted by the title company. The title company will be receipting the earnest money as well as receiving the contract to start the title work on it. So this is all, both of the earnest money and the contract receipt box will be receipted by the title company, as well as earnest money being made out to the title company. Alright, we've come to the end of our contract. I hope that's helpful. Please let me know if you have any questions. If not, good luck on submitting your offer.